He is risen? There we go. The morning dawn has come. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but the word Easter comes from the Old English word for dawn. Dawn, the morning dawn has come. The light has broken through the darkness, and it has overcome. Boy, so excited that you could be with us this morning to celebrate Easter. My name is Kelly. I'm one of the pastors here, and we are going to be doing some celebrating. You guys ready? Yes. We're going to be celebrating some good stuff. Well, let's get into it here. So I have, seems to me winter is still clinging on here in the Palouse. I was kind of hoping a late Easter would maybe give us a bit of a warmer Easter, but if you were out yesterday, it was cold and rainy, and this Utah boy has only been in the Palouse for a couple of years. And here's a couple of things that I've learned about the Palouse that are different than Utah. One, it's a heck of a lot colder here than it ever was in Utah. I remember my first winter, and I would see the ice on the inside of my window in the house kind of start, frosting over, and I thought I'd made a mistake. There shouldn't be on the inside of my house. Ice stays on the outside of my house, but those sub-zero temperatures, I'd never experienced anything like that before. And number two, it's a whole lot darker here than it is in Utah. I'm not talking about a spiritual sense of darkness. It's just literally dark here a lot longer. And that makes the winters feel long, doesn't it? Boy, these winters feel long up this far north. And I've also have come to a new tradition that I look forward to about every February. I look forward to those cold and winter days starting to get numbered when I see this particular flower growing in my flower bed, the yellow crocus. The yellow crocus. I've never seen one of those in Utah before, but in my first winter here, I remember seeing these things bloom like mid-February, and I couldn't believe my eyes, what I was seeing. I mean, we had just come off of like negative 20-degree weather, and here was this flower, I had no idea what it was at the time, blooming out of my flower bed. In fact, the first winter here, I think it had just snowed, and so I saw the crocus for the first time with snow all over it. And I thought I was in some paradoxical world. Like, what is happening? It's mid-February, negative 20 degrees, there's snow on the ground, and these little yellow flowers are beginning to blossom and bloom in my flower bed. And I remember I ran inside. This is how much of a nerd I am. I ran inside to my wife, who's probably doing 10 million different things, trying to get the kids ready for school. And I'm like, you have to see these flowers. They're blooming. It's negative 20 degrees outside. It just snowed, and I'm seeing these yellow flowers in the flower bed. But this has quickly become one of my new favorite things about living in the Palouse, is seeing these yellow crocuses emerge in the darkness and the cold of winter, because it's telling me that spring is coming, that this cold, dark time that I have been living in this Palouse is now going to be numbered, that there will be an end to the cold and the darkness, that there is going to be a springtime and a summertime, and the yellow crocus is that first flower that we see that reminds us of that. And now I look forward to every February in the cold and the dark, looking for the yellow crocus, waiting to see the crocuses in my flower bed. I think the emerging yellow crocus flower in the midst of the cold and dark winter illustrates well why we gather today as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. Like the unexpected crocus flower in winter blooming, bringing life into the cold and dark, the resurrection of Jesus gives us hope in the midst of a cold and dark world. That while it's still cold and dark, the resurrection is a blooming reminder in the midst of what new life is coming. So as we look at this, I want to transport us back 2,000 years ago to the morning of the resurrection of Jesus. That's going to be the setting for the events of this cold, dark beginning of the story, where the hearts of Jesus' people are badly discouraged and defeated. They have yet to really see and have their yellow crocus flower moment. But it's coming. When Jesus was arrested, the majority of his disciples flee and hide. The majority of them. Some of his closest friends, people who have been with him for many years. One of his closest friends, Peter, would follow him for many years and probably was one of the leaders within his discipleship group, followed him all the way up to the part where he was going to be put before a judicial system, in which case people start to recognize him. Hey, aren't you that Peter guy that follows Jesus? And he denies 3 times his connection with Jesus. He runs and kind of this shame and guilt from that. Judas, one of the most famous stories, he's seized with remorse after he sees what is happening to Jesus. He goes back and he tries to renegotiate with the high priest, and they send him away. He would go as far as to actually commit suicide, hanging himself out of the guilt and shame, but only if he would have waited a few more days. This leads into Jesus' crucifixion, where Jesus is unjustly mistreated, killed like a criminal or a slave, even though he is an innocent man. There he hangs for 6 hours, where he would hang until he dies. The only followers who stuck with him through this ordeal were some of his female followers, his own mother, his aunt, and his youngest disciple, John, who would be the Apostle John. Among them, his mother Mary, John's mother Mary, and a woman who stands out a little bit in this group, Mary Magdalene, of no relation to Jesus. And I want to look at this story through her perspective for just a little bit here. What's the perspective of this Mary who's been following Jesus, watching him die in these moments? Let's put ourselves in her place. She was with Jesus early in his ministry and was one of the many women who financially supported Jesus. We know of quite a few women who provided for Jesus through his ministry. She herself witnessed many miracles in the acts of Jesus. In fact, she herself was freed from 7 evil spirits by Jesus. She must have admired his teaching and his message of this restored kingdom here on earth, of new beginnings, of what it looks like to walk out a life that honors God and lives within his kingdom here on earth. She witnessed Jesus raise people from the dead, yet now she sits in this paradoxical place trying to grapple with the idea that now she is looking at her dead Messiah as she looks at him on the cross, as he breathes his last breath and hangs his head. Put yourself in her position for a moment. You've seen these amazing things. You've witnessed the amazing things. You've been impacted by the amazing things of Jesus, yet now he lays dead. I imagine it was like everything you thought you knew completely destroyed in a matter of hours. Perhaps you've been there. Perhaps you've been in those positions where you're just like, everything I thought was true is no longer true. Maybe you have to wrestle with this idea of, I don't understand the consequences of all that are about to happen because it just doesn't make sense. All the hopes for the future being completely ripped out from underneath you, I imagine, is exactly where she's at in this moment. But this was supposed to be the Messiah. How could he be dead? How could he have let this happen? What are we supposed to do now? Not to mention the trauma of watching someone you care about be crucified. Yet she still remained with him, pulling his body off of the cross, along with some of her other followers, or his followers. It must have been a dark time, a hard time, even so dark that all of creation itself, we read, becomes dark in the grieving of the sacrificed Jesus. It must have seemed like what Nietzsche would write about many thousands of years later, that God himself was dead. That God himself was dead. All these followers, through their mourning and grief, must have all collectively been wondering that phrase, what now? Have you guys ever been there? What now? What do I do now? I had all my cards in this basket, and it's not turning out the way I expected it to. What now? I think this is a reminder as followers of Jesus that we're going to have our what now moments because they had their what now moments. That we are not going to be immune to the cold and darkness of the sin in our world. We're still going to feel its presence, its impact, its effects on us, even in these days where we're going to have to sit in the same posture like Mary did and go, what now? What do I do now? Where are you, God? This wasn't the way that it was supposed to happen. In fact, not only are we deeply affected by these things, but we even contribute to them in our world as well. Now imagine if I only made one bad decision a day. That's generous, right? One bad decision a day. One time a day where I act inward, turning my heart towards myself. Perhaps I get defensive and I lash out at somebody. Perhaps I feel criticized, so I get aggressive and I get angry, and so you kind of get to this place where you demand respect. And in that place, I wound or I hurt, or maybe I create a rift in the relationship. It's kind of like a big X during my day. So maybe I just make one mistake. But if you look at it, there are 8.2 billion people on earth. Imagine if every person just made one mistake a day. Again, generous. What would we be left with? A mess. A convoluted, confusing, disorienting mess is what we're left with. It's chaotic, it's overwhelming. And none of these decisions stand by themselves, right? Sin is far more complicated than that because it affects everything around us. A father or a mother who has addictions, who gets angry and lashes out physically or emotionally. Those have lasting effects and connections to spouses and children and communities. All of these things are coming together, intertwined into a complex dynamic that is far too heavy and interwoven than we will ever be able to unravel on our own. We can't extract ourselves from this. It's far too overwhelming and intertwining when you look at it this way. It's far too heavy for any one of us to say, I can figure this out, I can do this. I will clean up myself. None of us have the ability to free ourselves from this web that occurs in our world. Yet the good news is that God doesn't leave his creation in this messy, cold, and broken place, left with confusion and disorientation. We might feel that from time to time, but he doesn't leave us there. The good news is that he gets centrally involved in it, that he immerses himself into the messiness of our world. That God becomes a human, enters into the human experience and story, immerses himself into the winters of sin. He becomes the representative human, being the one who doesn't contribute to the mess, the only one who doesn't contribute to the mess, doesn't put the X's on the board, but he absorbs it. That his ministry was wherever he went, he was absorbing and releasing and liberating and freeing the consequences of sin and death. Jesus goes to a cross in this convoluted mess, and he takes it upon himself, and it is there that mess actually becomes him. It overwhelms him to the place where it kills him on a cross. At Jesus' death and the crucifixion, we find ourselves looking at what it cost God to absorb the messiness of our sin and the brokenness in this world. This is what God is doing and has done. That it cost him everything. It cost him everything to do this. And if the story ended there, it would be a place where we are left in endless winter. We would be left in this place of what now? This wasn't supposed to happen. Where is the morning dawn? Where is the yellow crocus flower? Where is the hope if this was how the story was to end? We'd be left mourning forever the consequences of our sin that killed Jesus. A place where followers like Mary Magdalene now sit at his death, uncertain and mourning the cost, I love Mary's heart because it's almost like she has this big sister attitude towards Jesus. She's like, oh, I'm going to care for him, and I want to get to his body, and I want to anoint him once the Passover, when the Sabbath is over, when I can get to him again, and I can make sure he's taken care of. Yet they don't fully understand what's happening. In hindsight, they're going to look back on this and go, wow, this was an amazing thing. But in the moment, it must have felt very difficult as he did this. But thankfully, as we know, because you're here today, the story doesn't end at the cross. In fact, God, in a way, says, remember the crocus flower. Remember the crocus flower, that winter doesn't last forever and that spring is coming. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be reading John chapter 20. I'm going to start in verses 1 through 10. It's the story of the empty tomb. So you can follow along with me as I read these first 10 verses. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. You imagine, not only did you watch Jesus died, but now the people have broken into his tomb, and most likely, I'm sure she's assuming here, they're desecrated his body. I can't even go and anoint it. I can't do all the things that the body requires. She's panicked and probably deeply fearful. So Peter and the other disciples started for the tomb. The other disciple here is likely the young disciple John. Both were running. But the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. That's one of my favorite verses in the scriptures. John had to write, I was faster than Peter. I love that. And now I've lost my place because I was laughing at it. He bent over and looked at the strips of linen there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Moral of the story, John was much faster than Peter. No, Peter and John, they go and they visit this empty tomb. They're looking inside. There's nothing there. They see the linens, and they got to just be jaw-dropped. They must have just had a hard time believing what they were seeing here. They weren't yet thinking that this was a resurrected Jesus, but again, where was his body? Confusion and discouragement again has set in. They go back to the rest of their group, wherever they're all kind of staying together in community at the time, probably just as much more confused and defeated. But Mary and a few others, but John highlights the story of Mary here in John 20. But Mary is one of those, she's going to stay back. She's going to stay there in the garden where the tomb is. And she's going to have a different experience. Let's look at hers in John 20, 11 through 18. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. What a turnaround for Mary. She's at the tomb. All of the heaviness and the load of what she's just experienced for the last few days, she's got to be exhausted. She starts weeping at the tomb, probably just out of, I don't even know what to do at this point. Yet in that moment, what we see with the emerging of hope into the story of the cross and the resurrection is Mary's renewed joy. Is Mary's renewed joy. Here's the first sign of the end of winter and the coming spring, is that the resurrection renews our joy. Jesus seemed to wait to show himself to Mary. And I've always wondered that. Why wait to show Mary that he had resurrected? Why not just show Peter and John when they're coming in and looking as well at that moment? I think it's because Jesus knew that Mary was the last at the cross and the first to the tomb. Jesus had seen that this faithful woman who had been there at his worst and had hung through to the point where she wanted to be there first thing in the morning as soon as she could. And the first thing he did was he said, I'm going to turn your mourning into joy. Mary, justifiably confused in the process of all of this, is asked twice, both by the angels and by Jesus, the question, why are you crying? Why are you crying? Kind of an obvious one, I think, when you know the story. You're like, well, she's been through a lot. I think it's understandable she's crying. But what's happening here is that there is a redirection that Jesus is giving Mary, a redirection here, a restoration or a renewing here. That says that in Jesus' death and now in the living reality of his resurrection, we turn from this place of mourn and grief into a place of restored hope and joy. Again, I give the picture of the crocus flower reminding us that the time of cold and dark is almost over. That the resurrection reminds us that death has an end date. And this is, if living in this world that is the most powerful thing that we can think of. That there is an end date to death. That death one day will no longer be a reality for us. No longer will it be this haunting presence that kind of walks with us as we age, as we go by, as we experience it. But that it will melt away in the coming spring of the resurrection. That life itself is coming everlasting. That even though death is a reality, the resurrection of Jesus points us into a renewed joy that is to be had in an everlasting state. As I was thinking about this, as I was trying to think, okay, how does God renew my joy, especially when I'm coming through this place of sorrow, mourning, confusion, the what now situations, or even the why God situations that we go through? And I honestly, it comes to a place where I know I've shared this a lot before, but, I had a niece who passed away in a car accident when she was 17 a few years ago. And, in that moment, boy, it is confusing. It is why God, what now? Why would you let this happen? The depth of the mourning and the grief is beyond explanation unless you've actually been there. And as years go by, as times go by, the pain never really goes away. You get reminded of that pain. It becomes a bit of a part of your story or a hole in your heart that you think of often. But as things progress, as I start to walk through that process more and more, I start to recognize that I knew that she belonged to Jesus. Something I knew in those moments, but it's hard to see in the dead of winter. But I knew that she belonged to Jesus. And now I find myself looking at this place in joyful anticipation for the resurrection, that I may be united with her again because of what Jesus has done. That in the resurrection, that death had no power over her, even though she had to experience it. That when I see those yellow crocus flowers in my flower bed, it's a reminder that death has an end date. That death had its power defeated, even though we have to walk through it in this fragile world. My mourning has turned into a renewed joy for the hope that is in the future to come. And now I think for those who follow Jesus, it becomes a place where death doesn't, it's a terrible tragedy. We recognize that. We recognize our world is not inside Eden. It really is a hard place to live at times. But because of the resurrection, we have this hope and anticipating joy that the death will not have its last word. That all, again, who are in Jesus will be raised to life in him because of the resurrection. And that gives me great joy and great hope for the future to come. It's a joy renewed in a time of sorrow. It's a life seen in the reality of death. It's recognizing that death has been defeated, and while we all experience it, it will not last forever. It will not last forever. The resurrection is like the crocus coming up in the winter, that while it's still cold and dark, there may be snow on the petals of the crocus flower. Hope and joy in life is just not that far away and is accessible and available to all who put their faith in Jesus. That's good news, isn't it? That is good news for us. I hope that we all find renewed joy in knowing that Jesus conquered death, that death itself has been defeated and has opened up a way to a resurrected life, that we get to now live and walk in the newness of a resurrected life. Imagine a life for a moment where you walk and death doesn't have this horrible feeling presence over your life. Where you know that even while you walk through it and you see it, there is still a newness of life that is being promised and it's being anticipated. Boy, that's freedom, isn't it? That's freedom. That's liberation of knowing that not even death comes against us will prevail. It's a joy where all of the mourning will turn to joy everlasting. That's the joy I want. That's the joy that Mary is experiencing in this moment as she's seeing what she's seeing before her eyes. She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe that her teacher, her rabbi, marking her as one of the disciples, is right before her eyes saying, no more mourning. Time to celebrate. Time for joy. In her words here, I have seen the Lord. I have seen the Lord. Mary responds through tears, you can imagine, as she grabs hold of Jesus, Rabboni, emphasizing again her discipleship to him. And Jesus' first words are, hey, don't hold on to me. I mean, to me, I'm like, I think I would have done the same. I would have just grabbed hold and be like, don't leave me again. Like, that was a really hard 3 days. It might sound strange that the first thing Jesus says to her after this is, hey, don't hold on to me. What he's saying, though, is he's saying, I'm not going to leave you again. Don't hold on to me. I'm going to ascend. Don't worry about me leaving you. And that to me is a profound thing to say to a woman who is processing and grasping what's happening before her eyes. Is, hey, I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to leave you. He says, go back and tell your brothers what you have seen, and that I will be ascending to heaven. Mary runs back to the disciples. You can imagine with a different demeanor this time as she goes back and she says to them, I have seen the Lord. I have seen the Lord. I have seen him. Here we have one of the hallmark defenses of the resurrection of Jesus. That the first testimony of this event was from a woman. This is a silver bullet, if you know what it is, in the defense of the resurrection. If you were going to make up a story in the first century about a resurrected Messiah, the last person you would have said was the first eyewitness is a woman. Women in that time had no credibility of an eyewitness, no validity to their stories. They were just a little bit higher than a slave, and a slave had to be tortured in order to actually give an eyewitness account. So for the gospel writers to say, hey, the first person to witness the resurrection of Jesus, the one who has proclaimed to the disciples first, I have seen the Lord, is an astonishing claim to the original audience. Even the disciples don't believe her right away, do they? They're like, well, we got to go check it out for ourselves. But she has seen the risen Lord. And her cry, I have seen the Lord, becomes the anthem to which the gospel still echoes through history. As we read her story, as we read this example of this faithful woman who was the eyewitnesses to one of the eyewitnesses of the resurrection Lord, that story still echoes out through history, that she would be one of 500 people who would see him. 500 people who would see him. If you committed a crime and 500 people saw you do it, you're going to jail. 500 people saw the resurrected Lord, and still people doubt whether he rose from the dead. It's an amazing witness and an amazing proclamation to the world that they have seen the risen Lord. And it will change the world completely. Watch history play out for the next 300 years. It's going to radically change the history of the world. And it would cost many of them their own lives. Many of those who are going to see the resurrected Lord are going to die very hard deaths. But they didn't care because something had changed from that place of mourning and grief to a place of joy and anticipation of hope. They had seen the resurrected Jesus. They saw the Lord, and it changed them forever. And he's still doing that today. That people are still encountering the Lord, and it is still changing them today, 2,000 years later. And that's the question I have for you, is have you seen the Lord? Have you seen the Lord? Yeah, we haven't been at the garden tomb, and I didn't see him resurrect like I think Mary did. But have you seen the Lord? Jesus is now ascended, sitting at the right hand of God, an intercessor for us. But that doesn't mean we don't have a real and active relationship with him in our day where we can say, yes, I have seen the Lord work in my life. I have seen him change things. I have seen him intervene. I have seen him work in amongst us. I mean, think about your own life for a moment. How have you seen the Lord? I've seen the Lord. He took a guy like me buried deep in the cold and darkness of this world, and he met me. He cleaned me up. He ripped me out of the darkness and brought me into the light of the hope of salvation and joy. He gave me the new dawn that my heart saw. And I want that for every single human being. Not to just have this intellectual, theological connection with God. Like, yes, I believe in that. But to have an actual, authentic, real relationship with him where he reaches deep down into the yearnings of your soul, into the darkness and the cold of the sin callousness, and he breaks through it with his joy, happiness, mercy, grace, and forgiveness. This is the real thing that Jesus does. And I think today, especially in our younger generations, college, young adults, boy, I think they are searching for something real. They want to see God move in a real way, where he really acts in a powerful way. And I think they're right. I think it's a deep yearning with all of us to say that, right? That we're like, yes, please do something real. I want to see you, Lord. Look around. There are stories all around this room where people can say the same thing. I have seen the Lord. I have seen the Lord. His resurrection was just the beginning of a renewal within creation that we are still seeing today. That he is renewing, that he is restoring, that he is rebuilding now 2,000 years later. Even amidst our seasons of cold winters, it stands as hope for a better life, for a future. And this is where I want us to kind of sit in as we can conclude this message. Are you in a place where you feel more like a Mary before the tomb? Or are you in a place where you are ready to see the resurrected Lord? Where you're tired of trying to continuously maybe clean up your own efforts and trying to get rid of that messiness of sin on your own? Are you finally at your end? You're going, yeah, I'm just here. You take it. You have it. I can't handle it anymore. Because it is a heavy thing to carry on your own. And Jesus is saying, calling you to let it go put it down, that he can have it, that he's the only thing that can absorb it. He is the only one who has the capacity to take it all on. And he wants to turn your mourning into joy. He wants to give you the hope of the resurrected life. He wants to be like that crocus flower in my flower bed, remind you that life is possible in the cold and darkness of winter. That you will come to him today to rebuild you, to restore you, to renew you, as he has done thousands of millions of others before him. Myself, I'm just one of maybe billions of people who have been rebuilt, restored, and renewed, and there are many in this room that can say the same thing, that our God is very real, that the resurrection is a powerful reality of our world, and we must see our lives through the light of the resurrection of Jesus.